The sky over Tacoma that morning was the color of damp concrete, and the parking garage felt just as cold. My heels echoed against the cement as I made my way toward my car, clutching the leather folder I had packed the night before. Inside were the documents I had been told to bring proof of my identity records of my late father's trust, and the notes Harold and I had carefully kept over the years. It had been 3 months since Harold's funeral, and I had thought I'd faced the worst. Yet as I reached the second level of the garage, a faint odor made me pause. At first, I thought it was the usual mix of oil and exhaust, but this was sharper metallic gasoline. My car, a silver Honda I'd relied on for nearly a decade, sat exactly where I'd parked it the evening before. The smell seemed to come from underneath. I hesitated, leaning closer, when a voice cut through the stillness. "Ma'am, don't start that car." I spun around. A man was hurrying toward me from behind one of the concrete pillars. He wore a frayed jacket jeans with fraying hems and boots that had seen better years. His hair was unkempt, his face lined with wear. At first glance, he was just another drifter sheltering from the cold. But his tone wasn't hostile. It was urgent. "Stay back," I told him, gripping my folder like a shield. He raised his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you, but you can't turn that key. Your daughter-in-law has plans you don't see." The words struck me harder than the smell of fuel. Kara. He had said Carrara without saying her name. I tightened my grip on the folder. "Who are you? How do you know my family name's Eddie Karawawe? I used to work upstairs at Morrison and Hale before they pushed me out." His breath came in puffs of white. "Please just trust me long enough not to start that car." Every instinct told me to run, to call security, to pretend I hadn't heard, but the smell beneath my car, the way his eyes fixed on me, not wild, not threatening, but desperate, made me pause. I stepped back away from the driver's side door and felt my heart pound against my ribs. Without another word, I turned toward the stairwell. My heels clattered against the concrete as I pushed the door open, leaving the car behind in the gloom. By the time I reached the street level, my pulse was still racing. I kept walking toward the law office folder pressed against my chest, wondering what I would face once I opened the next door. The glass facade of Morrison and Hale gleamed against the gray morning, polished to a shine that spoke of old money and careful reputations. I pushed through the revolving doors, steadying myself with one hand on the leather folder at my side. My pulse had slowed since the garage, but the smell of gasoline still lingered in my mind. A receptionist, with a smile practiced to the point of indifference, ushered me down a carpeted hall. The conference room was all mahogany and brass, the kind of place meant to impress by weight rather than warmth. 3 attorneys sat lined up on one side of the table, papers neatly stacked before them. On the other side, legs crossed, sat Carrara. She looked impeccable, as always, hair smooth, nails perfectly painted, a pearl blouse tucked into a tailored skirt. But I caught the faintest twitch at the corner of her smile when she saw me walk in. Surprise, maybe even irritation, masked quickly behind that polished veneer. "Marion," she said warmly, standing to greet me as if I were an honored guest. "We weren't sure you'd make it today. Such a difficult time." After Harold's passing, her tone dripped sympathy, but her eyes didn't. I took my seat without touching her outstretched hand. The lead attorney, Mr. Connors, adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Kessler, thank you for coming. We're here to review some amendments made to the Kessler Trust. These changes are simple, meant only to ensure stability for young Leo's future." He slid a folder across the polished wood toward me. My stomach tightened inside. I saw pages stamped with legal seals, paragraphs heavy with language I recognized just enough to know it was wrong. The proposed trustee was no longer me. It was Carrara. Connors cleared his throat. "Given recent concerns about memory and decision, it was deemed prudent that Mrs. Ellison assume management of the trust. Of course, all proceeds will remain dedicated to Leo's welfare. I looked at Kara. She tilted her head, expression soft with pity. It's not about doubting you. Marion, we just want to protect you from unnecessary stress. Daniel and I only want what's best for Leo. The words struck like tiny needles. For years, Harold had said I was the one he trusted to balance our books. Invest wisely. Guard the family's future. He'd said it again when he was dying, gripping my hand with what strength he had left. And now, here they sat, rewriting his wishes in front of me. My voice was steady. Harold never questioned my ability to handle money. Neither did my father when he established that trust. These papers are not his words. The room stiffened. Connors offered a thin smile. Memories can fade. Mrs. Kessler documents. However, don't lie. Before I could answer, a knock at the door interrupted. The handle turned, and Eddie Caraway stepped inside. He looked out of place among the tailored suits, his jacket worn and his face drawn, but his hand clutched a thick folder. Carrara's eyes widened, color drained from her cheeks. For one suspended moment, she stared at him as though she'd seen a ghost. Then her body sagged against the chair, and she collapsed forward, motionless. The folder in Eddie's hand seemed suddenly heavier than the entire room. The room had gone still after Carrara's collapse, but my mind was anything but calm. I kept my hands folded tightly on the table, staring at the polished wood until the memory of Harold steadied me. He had always planned carefully, never leaving anything to chance years ago when my father passed. Harold was the one who suggested we place the inheritance in trust for Daniel's children. It will give them a future no matter what storms come, he'd said. He believed in preparing for the unseen. And now, here was the storm. Eddie's voice cut through the silence. Rough, but deliberate. I worked for Morrison & Hale for 12 years. Paralegal. I handled files that should have been above my pay grade. But I listened, and I saw enough. Kara started visiting the office alone about 6 months ago. First, it was casual questions about estate planning. Then meetings behind closed doors. Requests for documents I knew she wasn't authorized to see. I looked up at him, skeptical. His jacket smelled faintly of rain and cigarettes. His hair a tangle that spoke of nights in places without shelter, and they let you sit in on those meetings. He shook his head. No, but walls are thin and clerks talk. I raised questions, and within 3 weeks I was shown the door. Severance gag order the works. I didn't sign. His hand trembled as he set the folder down. I nearly walked away for good. But your husband, he was kind to me once. Treated me like I mattered when most clients didn't. I couldn't let this slide. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him, but desperation could make anyone invent stories. Yet the detail, the timing, the precision fit too neatly with the doubts I had pushed aside for months. Carrara's pitying smiles. Her whispered reassurances to Daniel when she thought I wasn't looking. Her eagerness to handle papers that should never have been hers. I stared at the folder between us, torn between fear and resolve. Whatever it contained, it would pull me deeper into the fight Harold had trusted me to face. The attorneys recovered quickly from Kara's fainting spell, though the air in the room felt charged with something sour. Connors leaned forward, sliding another folder across the table toward me. Mrs. Kessler, before we proceed further, we should review some additional concerns. I opened it with reluctant hands. Inside were medical reports bearing my name notes, suggesting confusion, disorientation, even paranoia. A physician's signature I did not recognize stared back at me. My stomach dropped as I read. Patient became agitated when asked to recall recent purchases. Next came written statements, supposedly from family friends, claiming I had mixed up dates, misplaced money, accused Daniel of stealing, And then the photographs, grainy shots of me at the grocery store checkout, at the bank counter, even stepping into church. Each caption twisted the scene, unable to calculate change. Forgot PIN number. Accused teller of fraud, all lies. Yet dressed in the clothing of truth, Connors cleared his throat, voice smooth as polished marble. As you can see, there is a pattern of concerning behavior. These amendments are in your best interest as well as Leo's. My hands trembled, but before I could answer, I felt a brush against my sleeve. Eddie, sitting just behind me, slid a plain manila folder beneath the table. I lowered my hand and pulled it onto my lap. Inside were crisp pages, the original trust documents dated, signed, intact. My father's provisions were clear. I was to serve as interim guardian until Leo came of age, or the court appointed a neutral trustee. Nothing about Kara, nothing about incompetence. The difference between the two sets of documents was a chasm of lies. I closed the folder Connors had given me. I won't be signing anything today. He frowned, but I kept my voice steady. I want my attorney present. Louise Hart. She's been our counsel for years. If these papers are legitimate, she'll confirm it for the first time. Their polished smiles faltered. The youngest lawyer shifted uneasily, and Carrara, pale, but recovering, gripped the arm of her chair with white knuckles. I'll have Louise here this afternoon, I continued. Until then, nothing moves forward. The silence in that room was heavier than the brass fixtures on the walls, and it followed me out into the hall, pressing close as I reached for my phone. The next morning, I sat stiff-backed on a wooden bench inside Pierce County Courthouse. The scent of varnish and old paper thick in the air. Louise Hart had insisted we move fast. She stood at the front, crisp in her navy suit, a presence that seemed to fill the room more than her frame allowed. When the clerk called our case, I followed her to the table, pulse hammering in my ears. Morrison and Hale's attorneys were already there, their confidence wrapped in silk ties and polished briefcases. Kara sat behind them, pale but defiant, her gaze fixed on the floor. Louise wasted no time. Your Honor, we request an immediate temporary restraining order to preserve the integrity of the trust. We have reason to believe alterations have been made without proper authority, supported by fabricated medical records and witness statements. She laid Eddie's folder on the table. The judge, a stern woman with a steel gray bun, leafed through the originals and then through the copies submitted by the firm. Her frown deepened with each turn of the page. Counsel, she said sharply to Morrison and Hale. These discrepancies are not minor. I am issuing a temporary restraining order. No amendments, no disbursements, no changes of trustee authority until this court has clarity. The gavel struck once, but the sound carried through my chest like thunder. Louise pressed on. Your Honor, we also request full billing records from Morrison and Hale for the past 12 months, particularly entries tied to Mrs. Ellison. The judge nodded. You will produce those records within 7 days. Failure to comply will be treated as contempt for the first time. I saw Connors falter his practiced calm, cracking outside on the courthouse steps. The February wind cut sharp, but I breathed deeper than I had in weeks. Eddie stood off to the side, hands shoved in his pockets. When I approached, he didn't meet my eyes at first. I almost didn't tell you, he admitted. They know how to ruin people. I was scared, but silence felt like betrayal. Your husband treated me better than most. I couldn't walk away. I studied him, rumpled, tired, carrying the weight of too many bad nights. Flawed, yes, but brave in a way that mattered more than polish. As I turned to Louise, already fielding calls for the next step, I knew the real battle had only just begun. They came to my house unannounced, Daniel leading the way. Kara a step behind him. My son looked worn, his shoulders rounded from weeks, perhaps years of pressure I had not seen until now. Carrara's expression was carefully composed, though her eyes flickered when they met mine. I laid the photographs on the coffee table between us, the shots of me at the grocery store at the bank, the captions twisting ordinary errands into signs of decline. Daniel frowned, picking one up. "Mom, this doesn't look like he stopped short." Kara leaned forward. "Daniel, you know she's been struggling? These are just examples of what we've all noticed." I met his eyes. "Do you remember canceling Christmas dinner last year? You told me Kara was sick, yet here it says I forgot our plans entirely." His brow tightened. He looked at Kara. "That's not what happened." Her composure slipped. She reached for him, but he pulled back slightly. Her voice cracked. "We didn't have a choice. We're drowning, Daniel. The business is collapsing. 2 mortgages, credit cards, $280,000 we can't cover. We needed the trust to stabilize everything." He stared at her as if hearing a foreign language. "So you twisted her words, her life, to make her look incompetent." Carrara's tears came fast now, streaking her makeup. "I thought if we showed she couldn't handle it, they'd give it to us. To you. To me, we could have fixed everything." Daniel dropped the photograph, his hand trembling. He turned to me, shame written across his face. I steadied my voice, though my chest ached. "You weren't protecting me, Daniel. You were preparing to erase me." The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel, and it carried us into the moment when outside forces would begin to dismantle the house of cards Kara had built. Detective Sarah McIntyre arrived at my home 2 mornings later, her badge clipped neatly to her belt. A leather notebook tucked under her arm. She was calm, but direct, the kind of woman who seemed to see more than anyone said. Daniel sat on the edge of the armchair, restless, while Kara hunched at the far end of the couch, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. Sarah laid out copies of documents across my dining table, my supposed medical records, the false witness statements and receipts for consulting fees billed by Morrison and Hale. Each page landed like a stone in water. "We've confirmed several of these witnesses were paid," Sarah said flatly. "Neighbors who suddenly remembered incidents that never happened. Clerks who signed affidavit after receiving envelopes of cash. And this." She held up an invoice from the firm with Carrara's name attached. Kara stared at the table lips, trembling. Eddie sat nearby, shifting uncomfortably before sliding his small, spiral notebook toward the detective. I wrote down everything I saw. Dates, times, people in and out of Morrison's office, even overheard conversations. Sarah flipped through, nodding slowly. "This corroborates the billing trail enough to open charges for fraud and conspiracy." Kara's voice was barely a whisper. "What happens to me?" Sarah looked at her evenly. "The district attorney is prepared to offer a plea deal if you cooperate. Probation, restitution, community service in exchange for testimony against Morrison and his partners." Daniel's head dropped into his hands. "God, Kara." He lifted his face toward me, eyes red. "Mom, I should have seen it. I was blind. I let her poison what Dad left us. What you've protected all along, but I'll stand with you now. Whatever it takes, I'll testify." I pressed my palm against the table, grounding myself. The betrayal ran deeper than accounts and signatures. They hadn't only tried to take money. They had tried to steal my name, my competence, the trust Harold placed in me. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. As Sarah gathered the evidence and closed her folder, I knew the next chapter of this fight would leave none of us untouched. The day after Detective McIntyre's visit, Daniel asked Kara to meet him in my kitchen. He stood stiffly by the counter, his hands gripping the edge as if bracing for impact. Kara sat across from him, her eyes darting between us, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. "I can't defend you," Daniel said finally, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Not to the court, not to Mom, not even to myself. If they call me to testify, I'll tell the truth about everything." Kara flinched as if struck. "Daniel, please no." He cut her off sharper than I'd ever heard him. "You made me doubt my own mother. You forged papers to erase her. I loved you, but I won't carry your lies anymore." The silence stretched until Kara sagged against her chair, her composure breaking. "Then I'll take the deal," she whispered. 3 years probation, restitution of the legal fees, 400 hours at the food bank. At least I won't go to prison." The words fell like stones into the room. For her, it was surrender. For Daniel, it was collapse. For me, it was both justice and grief. Within weeks, Morrison and Hale's partners were indicted. Court transcripts detailed how they'd built a side business of altering estates for profit. 2 senior partners received prison sentences, and the firm's reputation crumbled in headlines. I watched it unfold with a strange mixture of vindication and hollowness. The law had done its work. My father's trust was intact, Harold's wishes preserved. Yet my family sat fractured around me, a son caught between shame and loyalty, a daughter-in-law bound to service instead of love. I wondered if what had broken could ever be restored. Even as the next hearing loomed ahead, the final hearing came in early spring rain streaking down the courthouse windows, as if the sky itself were weary of our fight. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Louise, hands folded listening, as the judge read through her decision. "Mrs. Hun Kessler," she said, her tone neither soft nor harsh, simply resolute. "Your testimony was clear, your records precise, and your intentions beyond question. However, given the size of the trust, the court finds it appropriate to appoint a neutral trustee to manage the assets. This is standard procedure. You will remain guardian of your grandson's person with authority over his daily care and welfare." I nodded steady, despite the flicker of disappointment. I had known this was likely. What mattered most was that Leo's future was safe, free from forged papers and false claims. Daniel caught my eye from the gallery. His expression held both apology and gratitude, as if he knew the trust placed in him had been strained too far. He had moved into a modest apartment downtown, trading the grand Maple Ridge house for 2 bedrooms above a coffee shop. He spoke of rebuilding his consulting practice from the ground up, this time with honesty instead of borrowed appearances. Eddie had settled into the garage loft behind my house. He cut the lawn, trimmed the hedges, kept the garden neat. There was steadiness in him now, a rhythm of work and rest that anchored us both. Sometimes, when I brought him coffee in the mornings, I caught a glimpse of pride in his eyes, as though he had rebuilt something of his own as well. The rain had cleared by the time I left the courthouse, and I felt a strange calm, as though the gavel had closed not just a case, but a chapter of my life. 6 months later, autumn settled over Tacoma with a gentler hand than the storms we had weathered. In the corner of my garden, a young lemon tree stretched fragile branches toward the sky. I planted it for Leo, a reminder that roots can hold firm even when winds tear at the leaves. I watered it each morning, whispering to myself that it was growing just as we were. Carrara's probation hours were nearly halfway done. Word reached me from the food bank. She served meals, stacked cans, washed dishes until her hands were raw. Sometimes Eddie went to volunteer there too, carrying crates of produce or fixing a broken hinge. The irony was sharp, but he told me he didn't go for her. "I go because I know what it feels like to be on the other side of the line," he said. Daniel rented a small office near Pacific Avenue. The sign read simply, "Kessler Consulting." No partners, no illusions, just honest work. He paid down debts little by little, walking with a new humility. Each week, he visited, bringing Leo to play in the garden, and I saw the man Harold and I had hoped he would become. I no longer felt like a widow waiting to be erased. I was a mother, a grandmother, a steward of what mattered. The lies had not destroyed me. They had sharpened me. I didn't just protect an inheritance. I preserved a future.